What is up guys, Blue Spooky here. I've been doing the title question for about a week now, so I think I have a big enough sample size. It's fairly evenly split, with slightly more people saying they'd prefer the Megamix title, so we will be sticking with that for now. I did see some confusion. The Megamixes on the weekdays are all news stories, as well as I can keep track of at least. Please remember that I do read about 2,000 stories a year, so I'm not going to be able to keep track of all of them all the time. There will be some repeats every now and again, although I do my best to make sure that doesn't happen. There were also some people complaining about the amount of ads in recent videos. I don't really know what to tell you guys about that. I've not really changed the frequencies of my ads at all in the entire time I've been doing YouTube, so I'm not really sure what's going on there. With all that being said, if you guys end up enjoying this video, please be sure to like, share, comment, and subscribe if you feel so inclined. Doing any of those helps the video to do well, and the channel to do well, and ensures I can keep making these videos for a long time to come. If you guys have any thoughts about the stories in the video, please be sure to leave them in the comments below, as reading your guys' comments is one of my favorite parts about doing these videos, even if I don't respond to them often since I'm so busy. Last but not least, if you'd like to support the channel further than you already do, there should be a join button somewhere around the subscribe button. It's only $2 a month at the lowest tier, and you get special emoticons to use when you comment, and a special symbol next to your name. No content is locked behind the paywall. It's simply something you can do if you'd like to support the channel further than you already do. Without further ado, thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll get right into the video. When I was younger, mainly in my late teens, I used to babysit. I did this for several people who lived in my neighborhood, or within the city. One night, I was asked to babysit 2 kids for the night, while the parents were going out on a date or something. It was going to be about 4 or 5 hours, and the kids were 5 and 3 respectively. They were some pretty young kids. After the parents left, I made food for the children and looked after them. For most of the night, things went really well actually. At about 8:30, it was time for the little ones to go to bed. Their bedrooms were upstairs. I remember telling them around that time that they had to go to bed soon. The 5-year-old boy happened to have a lot more energy than the 3-year-old girl did. After I got them both upstairs, I made sure they got ready for bed. The 3-year-old seemed really sleepy already, so I took her to her bedroom to make sure she got into bed and fell asleep. I turned around, and I guess the 5-year-old boy had wandered back downstairs in that short time, because right as I was about to leave the room, I heard the back door downstairs opening. Of course, I had a bad feeling about this. I knew the children were not supposed to go outside. They were supposed to be going to bed right now. However, I was not at all surprised with how energetic this kid was being. I ran back downstairs and went over to the door. The boy was standing right next to it, and I was relieved to see he hadn't left and gone outside yet. I told him he had to go to bed now, and he said okay. We both started walking back over to the stairs. As we were about to climb them, I asked him why he'd even opened up the back door in the first place. I reminded him that he was not supposed to play outside after dark. The boy then told me that he had opened up the door to let a man in. When I heard this, I instantly felt chills. I was hoping he was talking about his imaginary friend or something. After we got up the stairs, I asked him if he really let a man into the house, and he said yes immediately. I asked him what the man looked like. The boy only told me that he was tall. When I asked him where the man had gone, the boy said that he'd gone into the living room somewhere. I got the boy into his bedroom and had him climb into bed, then decided to creep back downstairs. I hadn't heard or seen anything yet. I was hoping the boy was just using his imagination, but I didn't really think that would be the case. When I got back downstairs, most of the lights were already off because I had turned them off earlier. I couldn't really see much. I carefully walked over to the living room and turned a light on. When I did, I didn't immediately see anything. I called out asking if anybody was there, but it was still silent. I walked around the house very briefly, but as I did, I got creeped out. I ended up pretty much turning around and going right back over to the stairs. I hadn't seen anything, but I stood there for a few moments, just observing, looking around and listening. That was when I heard a noise coming from just out of my view, on the other end of the home. My reaction was to quickly run up the stairs. My heart was racing, and I was sure that somebody really was in the house. At that point, I went into the 3-year-old's room. I woke her up and grabbed her, then carried her to the 5-year-old's bedroom. I closed the door, grabbed my phone, and called the police. I told the police that someone was inside the home that was not supposed to be there. I gave them the address as we waited inside the bedroom. I didn't really hear much of anything outside, but after only a few minutes, I heard footsteps coming closer. This meant they had to be close to climbing the stairs. I could then hear the person beginning to walk up them as they made their way to the top where we were. I got really nervous. There was no lock on the door to the room we were in. I really had no idea what I was going to do if he actually got to us. The footsteps reached a little past halfway up the stairs. Then they seemed to abruptly stop and turn around. It sounded like the person was now going back to the bottom. After that, I could hear them walking away. Just about a minute later, I heard a knocking at the front door. I realized the police must have arrived. Whoever was inside the house must have heard them approaching and left before they could get there. I went down and answered the door and talked to the officers. The parents were called, and they had to come home. Obviously, the kids were fine in the end. The whole thing was really crazy, though. I have no idea why the man was at the back door to the house when the boy let him in. When the man got inside, he must have heard me coming to get the boy and gone straight into the living room or something, because I hadn't seen or heard the man at all when I got down there. I only saw the boy standing at the door. I did babysit for those parents a few more times, during which nothing strange like that ever happened again, but that will always be my craziest memory from babysitting. One night, when I was much younger, my mother and I had a scary situation involving a broken down car. It was just my mom, Kate, and I at home that night, as my dad was out working late. It was a windy fall night, and I remember helping Kate make a late dinner right around sunset time. We were in the middle of cooking, cutting up a bunch of vegetables, when suddenly the front doorbell rang. I followed Kate over, as she went to see who was there. When we got to the door, there was some man standing right outside. I was instructed to stay out of sight behind the door, as Kate opened it slightly to ask the man what was going on. I listened to the short conversation, as the man explained that he had broken down and was wondering if Kate could help by providing some jumper cables maybe. Kate instructed me to stay inside, as she put on her coat and proceeded outside in an attempt to help the man. We did have some jumper cables. I watched from the window as Kate pulled her car around to face the man's car. It took a little bit to get everything set up, but finally they got the cables working and the stranger's car to turn on. The car seemed to start up after a few attempts, and after a brief conversation, the man thanked Kate profusely and was on his way. At this point, it was getting quite dark out now. Kate came back inside, and we quickly resumed the preparation of our dinner. We were hoping to have it ready by the time Dad got home. I'm not sure exactly how much time had passed by. I'm guessing it was around a half an hour later, though. The doorbell rang again. Kate was visibly frustrated at the second ringing of the doorbell. She went to go see who was there. Since dinner was coming along and stuff was now actually cooking, I stayed in the kitchen to keep it going. As I was mixing the pot of food on the stove, I heard the sliding glass door just to my left make a noise, as if somebody was trying to pull it open. The door was obviously locked. I placed the stirring spoon down that I was using and took a couple of steps to my left to see what had made that noise. As I got closer to the sliding door to see, I couldn't really make anything out at first because of the darkness of the backyard. That's when I saw a man's face emerge. He pressed it right up against the glass of the door. Terrified by this jump scare I had just received, I ran backwards and screamed. It appeared to be the very same man from just a while ago, who Kate had helped to jumpstart his car. I couldn't be 100% certain it was the same guy, because I had only watched him a ways away through the front window, but he was wearing the exact same outfit that the man from earlier was wearing. Kate heard me scream and rushed back into the kitchen. Immediately, she noticed the man outside the sliding door, who was now violently trying to pull it open. The cops and my dad were immediately called. My dad rushed home from work as soon as he heard about it. We went into another room and waited for the cops and my dad to arrive, but obviously the man fled by the time anybody got there. At that point, the making of dinner was a complete afterthought. We ended up having to order pizza, as Kate explained the whole night's events to my dad and the police. Nothing was ever seen of the man again after, but I'll never forget the feeling when I saw that man's face appear in the glass. Last year, I went to the Mall of America. It's one of the biggest malls in the country. I was visiting Minnesota from my home state of South Carolina. I was there to see some family that I have. The first day I was there, I just had to go check out the giant mall. When I got inside, I first explored some of the stores, then walked through the amusement park they have in the center of it. Honestly, I was having a great time. I remember right as I was leaving the amusement park, though, and going back into the mall area, some guy suddenly emerged right behind me. The same guy proceeded to follow me down the giant mall hallways for at least 5 minutes or so. He went right up the escalator right behind me, too. Soon it became obvious this man was trying to follow me. He really wasn't even attempting to try and hide it. I mean, the only reason I was able to notice it so quick was because he was only about 10 feet behind me. When I stopped to look inside a store, he stopped as well. When I kept walking, he'd do the same. He could have easily gone past me by now. When I was going up an escalator, I stood kind of sideways on it and looked behind me to get a better look at who this guy was. He was sort of thin and had on just a simple t-shirt and jeans. He had longer red hair that was tied up in a bun. I took the next escalator up to the 3rd level of the mall, and the guy continued to follow right behind me. When I got to the 3rd level, I left the escalator and walked around to find the food court. After I found it, I sat down. I was a bit hungry and wanted to get some food. Plus, with this guy right behind me, I had no idea what he was going to do. I sat down at a random table just to see what the man would do next. He walked over and sat down at the very next table to me. Then I watched him look around as though he were trying to pretend he wasn't following me. Did this guy seriously think he was being inconspicuous right now? Because if so, he was failing quite miserably. After sitting at the table, texting with some family, and browsing my phone for a while, I decided I'd had about enough of this guy. I stood up from my table and walked right over to him. He didn't look at me at all until I was standing directly in front of him for a good 5 seconds. Then he looked up with a completely surprised expression on his face. When he did, I immediately confronted the man. "Hey, why are you following me?" The man didn't even attempt to deny it or answer me at all. He just got up and quickly walked away. I was surprised by this odd behavior, but I watched him walk all the way until he was completely out of sight. At that point, I was just glad he was gone. I was finally able to order some food and eat it in peace. After that, I wandered around a little bit more and bought a few more things at some of the stores, mostly some souvenir-type stuff as well as a hat. By the time I was done with my shopping and exploring of the mall, my legs were quite tired from all the walking. I'd completely forgotten about the man from earlier. I left through a skyway and started walking to the parking garage where my car was. I was going to drive back to my hotel about 10 minutes away, and the next day go over to my family's home. I was one level too high where I was, so I had to take the parking garage stairs to get down to the correct level. When I started walking down them, though, I turned the corner and saw that very same man that had been following me earlier. He was now just standing by the side of the stairs. He looked at me as I passed by, and after I did, he immediately started following me again. I left the stairs for the parking garage and started moving quickly to my car. He remained behind me the entire time. I was much more concerned now that I wasn't inside the mall where there were a bunch of other people around. I turned around and confronted the man again. "Why are you following me?" Again, he didn't say anything back to me. He was just looking at me. After many moments, he finally spoke. "My car's over there," he said. I didn't believe this at all, especially because of the fact he had been standing in the stairwell until I passed by. Then he magically wanted to leave the stairs all of a sudden. I didn't say anything back to the man. I rushed over to my car. He was still following me at a distance of about 40 feet, if I had to guess. At last, I found my vehicle. I walked around to the side of it and was careful to unlock it. I got right up to the door. The man walked to the third car down from mine but did not get inside. He just kinda stood by the door. As soon as I opened my back door to put the shopping bags inside, the man suddenly rushed out from the car he was next to and began to charge toward me. I had no time to get to my driver's seat. The man was running so fast, plus it caught me completely off guard. Instead, I jumped into the back seat of my vehicle and scrambled to press the lock button on my keys. I heard the little honk signaling my car was now locked on all doors. The man arrived maybe 3 seconds later. Now I was stuck in the back seat as the man was frantically attempting to open my door. He was looking right inside the car at me too, just a couple of feet away. The only thing separating us was the car window. The fact that we were in a parking garage with no one else currently around to help made things much worse. I crawled over to my front seat to get in the driver's side and start my engine. I heard the guy say from outside that I was not going anywhere. He moved to the front of the car as I did, and when he saw me putting the keys in the ignition, he quickly ran around to behind my vehicle, I guess to block me in. There were other cars parked on both sides of me, and in front of me was a concrete barrier, so backing out was my only option. The man stood there just staring into my back window. After a few seconds, he demanded I get out of the car. I wasn't sure what I was going to do, but I knew I sure wasn't getting out of my vehicle. The man kept standing there, and I was afraid he would try to smash the windows or something. I began honking the horn of my car, pressing it repeatedly and holding it for several seconds as well. I was hoping to draw some attention to myself so that anybody in the area might notice what was going on. After I was honking for maybe 20 seconds straight, the guy suddenly walked away. As soon as he did, I backed out and left. While I was driving away, I was a little concerned the man would get into his own vehicle and attempt to follow me, but I don't think he was even parked anywhere near me. I was able to make it back to my hotel safely. I don't know, though, how the guy seemingly knew where I'd parked already, because he was standing in the stairwell, almost as if he'd been waiting for me the entire time. Maybe it was just a coincidence, but when I told my family about the experience, they said they were sorry it happened and ended up going back to the mall with me. That time, thankfully, none of us were followed. This happened many years ago. I was driving my car home one night, going through a city I was sort of unfamiliar with. I was about an hour and a half away from home at this point in the drive. I was not on the highway, but instead on a much quieter road. I had just driven through a seemingly very small town. Things were very quiet, and it was very late out. I had only seen a couple of other cars out on the road. I was traveling about 35 miles per hour since I saw a stop sign coming up ahead. Things were very dark in this section of the road, with no street lights or anything surrounding the road at all. It was mostly just grassy fields and trees or woods as far as the eye could see. At the stop sign, as I was approaching, I saw it was a four-way intersection. I slowed down and was just about to come to a complete stop. All of a sudden, I heard a knocking coming from my passenger side window. I looked over startled, and when I did, I saw a man standing there. He was sort of tall, and I couldn't really see his face at all. I could see him knocking, though. It really took me by surprise. I was wondering who this guy was and what he wanted. He motioned for me to roll down the window, so I did just a little. I had a bad feeling about this. The man spoke, telling me that he really needed a ride. His car had broken down. He promised me that he was not dangerous or anything, and asked me multiple times for a ride without me even having a chance to respond. To me, this came off as quite sketchy. I started to shake my head and say no to the guy. I could tell that he knew I didn't want to. However, my window was still open a little. The man began attempting to reach inside and open the door. He kept saying please and that he was so desperate. This didn't do anything to change my mind, though. I hit the gas and drove away. He was forced to let go, and I left him standing there in the middle of the road. The whole experience was really strange. As I drove away, I wondered if I'd really done the right thing, or maybe this really was just a guy desperate for a ride. My instincts, though, were telling me no. The way the man reached inside of my car so aggressively made him seem anything but innocent. I definitely felt confident with my decision and went on with my drive. Thankfully, the roads got better, and I made it home just fine. Later that night, following that experience, I got curious and tried to look up on the map online where it was. I was able to find that area and looked up the city as well. What I found was that there had recently been a string of car smashings and robberies in the area. I'm pretty confident that guy was going to either try to rob me, steal my car, or maybe even something worse. This happened when I was in high school. For some detail, I'm a woman and was a junior at the time this took place. I used to walk to school and back every day because I lived pretty close by. It would usually take me around 10 to 15 minutes to walk there, and I would take sidewalks basically the entire way there. One morning, I left when I usually did, at around 7:30 a.m. School started at 7:50. After walking out the front door and leaving my house with my backpack, I saw a car on the side of the street. It was right in front of the sidewalk where I would normally walk past. I had never seen it there before, so obviously I did not know who it was. I planned to just go right past it. But when I did, I saw the passenger side window rolling down. Somebody said something to me, and I looked over. The car was an older, dark gray BMW, and the driver was a youngish-looking guy, seemed a bit older than me. He then asked me if I needed a ride to school. I had never seen this guy before and didn't think he even went to my school. He told me his name was Ryan, I think, but I can't remember exactly. He said which school he went to, which happened to be a school in the next city over. Then he said he was good friends with Erica, who happened to be one of my best friends. Apparently, he was on his way to pick her up, and she'd asked him to pick me up as well and give us both rides to school. Immediately, I said no thanks. I had never heard Erica talk about this guy before, and it all seemed really weird. The guy asked me why not, and I said maybe some other time. I wanted to confirm with Erica if she even knew this guy at all. Maybe there was a chance that she was friends with him, but she hadn't said anything to me about this. Obviously, it was more than a little bit suspicious. The guy seemed disappointed, but ultimately said okay. I kept walking down the street as he pulled away in his car and drove past me. Right when he got to where I was, though, he stopped his car in the middle of the road and rolled down his window again. He said, "Last chance." I said no once more, and finally he drove off altogether. I walked the rest of the way to school and got there basically at the normal time. As I was walking, I texted Erica about it. In that semester of high school, my first hour class was English. By the time I got to class, I'd gotten a response from Erica. I usually didn't get to see her before school because our first hour classes were on opposite ends from each other. She said she had no idea who I was even talking about. I'd had a feeling already that was what she was going to say. This was a real mystery to me, though. Who was this guy? Why did he try to pick me up in his car? And how did he know that my best friend was named Erica and where I went to school as well? I didn't know anything about him at all. During that same first hour English class, probably about 30 minutes in, the school suddenly went into a lockdown. I had no clue what it was for at the time. We had never had a lockdown before in my entire time there. Just a few drills, really. We were all told to sit at the back of the classroom. Lights were turned off, the door was locked by our teacher. We sat there in silence for what felt like a really long time. Probably about 30 minutes. Eventually, the lockdown was lifted. By that time, we were all very curious as to what was even going on. By the end of the day, I found out that apparently a man had walked into the school after class had started and right past the receptionist. The only door that was open after classes had started was the front door. He was then spotted by a hall monitor who asked him for a pass. The guy walked past him without saying anything and went to the locker commons area. Then he hid there. The school was locked down immediately. Unfortunately, the guy somehow managed to escape from the commons area to the nearest exit without being seen by anyone and was able to get out. The school and property were searched thoroughly, but he had gotten away. It was good that he was gone, but also bad that he was not caught. Some of us were wondering where he went, but he could have been anywhere. There was a large wooded area behind our school, so I think they pretty much gave up on the search for the man. Still, I had no clue who the guy was who had been inside the school either. I didn't even connect the dots at all until after school that day. I was walking home like I always did, less than halfway there, when I saw that same car that had been by my house earlier. I got a bad feeling. This guy was not who he claimed to be. The car was parked on the side of the road that I'd have to walk right past again. I sped up and started moving faster, but when I got even with the car once more, I heard him call out to me. His window was already down this time. "Hi!" I looked over and said hello, all while continuing to move. He then told me to stop. I ignored him. "Did you know I was in your school earlier?" I stopped and couldn't believe what I was hearing. He started to laugh, this really creepy laugh. He bragged about how they'd locked the school down because of him and how he'd managed to escape scot-free. As he was saying this, he opened his car door and got out. I started to go even faster until the man began to run at me. At that point, I started running too. Unfortunately, it seemed as though he was faster than I was. I could already tell he was gaining on me. I left the sidewalk and ran out into the middle of the road. Then came possibly one of the luckiest moments of my entire life. A car started driving down that otherwise completely quiet road. I ran straight for the car, and when I got close, I realized it was somebody that I actually knew. It was one of my classmates, a guy named Matt. He saw me and stopped his car. I ran for the passenger side while the man chasing me continued to come after me. I got inside Matt's vehicle and told him to lock the doors right now. The guy chasing reached the car moments later. The doors were locked, but the guy still tried to get in and then began pounding on the window. Matt asked me who this guy was, and I told him to just get out of there right now. He drove away with the guy standing there in the street. I explained everything to Matt as I got out my cell phone to call the police. I told them everything, and Matt dropped me off at my house a short time later. The police came out and talked with me and my parents and said they would look out for the car I described. Surprisingly, that very same day, the man was caught by the police. He had been stalking me for several days without me even knowing at all. I'm not sure exactly why he went into our school. Maybe he was waiting for me to get back to my locker. He honestly could have passed for a student because he looked very young, but he was actually in his mid-20s and not a student at all. This was years ago now, but I still remember it all the time. I'm really glad Matt was driving by when he did. I don't know what would have happened to me had he not been there for me. My stepmother was a real shit. I mean, she was such a shit that I can't even to this day mention her name without getting extremely pissed off. Because of that, I will not be identifying her in this story, and will simply refer to her as my stepmother. She and my dad got married after my parents got divorced. She was a lot younger than my dad, and I often wondered what she even saw in him. However, when my dad left the military service and became a truck driver, it became all too apparent. We moved from the military base to a house in rural Ohio. It was a huge house, but also pretty run down. My dad had this whole thing about wanting to live out in the country and having us kids live there too, so he took us there with him. The house itself was a good 45-minute drive out of town. Our house was on the top of a small hill, and there was a trailer at the bottom of the hill. Other than that, the only thing around us were tons of trees and hills. She didn't have to get a job at any point during the years I knew her, even though my dad didn't make enough money to keep us above the poverty line. She just kinda sat on her ass all day, while making us stepkids do just about everything. More than just that, though, she was also cheating on my dad nearly every time that he was out of town. The only smart thing she ever seemed to do was that she always had the affairs outside of the home. We knew they happened, though, because not only did she love to brag about them to us, she also violently threatened us in case we ever told our dad what was happening. He was also drunk so often, though, that it likely wouldn't made much of a difference either way. He would probably forget all about it by the time morning came around. Well, that all changed one night, while my dad was away on a job. I was usually happy when she went off on one of her cheating dates, because she would be gone the entire night. This time, though, I noticed something weird. I was up on the second floor bedroom, reading a book by lamplight. That was when I noticed a car pulling up in our driveway. The day had been the first really severe fall day. You know what I mean, where the trees really start losing their leaves, and they fall down like rain. This continued into the night, of course, and made it hard to distinguish the vehicle coming up the driveway. At first, I thought it may be my dad, but he would have been driving his rig, and this was obviously something else. It wasn't until the people got out of the car and were talking awfully loudly that I figured out it had to be my stepmother and whatever new guy she was with. I was surprised she would have brought him to our home directly, but I guess she figured she was safe, since my dad would be gone for the entire week. Needless to say, I was very uncomfortable hearing her come into our home flirting with this random guy. I tried to do my best to just ignore it and read my book, but it was not going very well. I definitely never thought about turning my light off and then trying to go to sleep, because I could never have gone to sleep with all the noises occurring right in the house with me. I just kept lying in bed reading. Suddenly, I heard someone walking around. Faster than I could have reacted, my bedroom door was thrust open. There was a light on in the hallway, and I saw the shadow of my stepmother come into the room. She began yelling and screaming at me. threatening me in her drunken haze that if I mentioned anything about this to my dad, she would kill me. She came right up to my bed and grabbed me by the shoulders, shaking me while screaming threats right in my face. I was in shock. Where had this all come from? I had, of course, never been drunk at that point in my life, so I didn't know how it could really screw with your head. Tired of all her... I pried her hands off me and shoved her back away from me. She stumbled and fell against the wall, smacking her head hard. She got up and ran out of the room. She wasn't gone very long. Only moments later, she was back at the door with my dad's gun in hand. She pointed it directly at me and began screaming at me about how dare I put my hands on her, totally forgetting she was assaulting me at the time. She was threatening to shoot me, calling me all sorts of names. When she pulled back the hammer on the gun, I became indescribably terrified. I knew that being drunk could make someone sloppy and unbalanced, and she could have accidentally shot and killed me with no problem. It was a tense few moments, and I didn't really know how long it lasted. Fortunately, though, the guy she was cheating with obviously wasn't as impaired as she was. When he found out what was happening, he took the gun away from her. While he was doing it, I kept expecting her to try and shoot me. He apologized to me profusely, as if that meant anything at the time. I got up and went downstairs, while they went back to my dad's room. I made a phone call, and let's just say that for some reason, both of them were very shocked when the police showed up shortly after. I explained what happened, and nothing was done to the guy, since he hadn't really done anything. My stepmother was arrested, though, and shortly afterwards, my dad kicked her out. This was in the late 80s, and thankfully, I've never seen her since then. This story happened to me 2 weeks ago now. I'm a 20-year-old woman, and I work in a high school located in a part of my city known for its problems. Delinquency, street harassment, drugs, etc. I've been working in this high school for 5 months now, and never really had any problems with the people I met, until March 25th. It was 4:30, and I left work. I was walking toward the bus stop to meet a friend in a park on the other side of the city. Once out, I lit up a well-deserved cigarette and noticed at the same time that a car seemed to be driving by abnormally slowly. I didn't really pay much more attention to it, though. I arrived at the bend in the street and had to go left to get to the stop, which was about 180 meters from where I was at that moment. As I was about to turn, the car that was driving slowly stopped. Not surprising, as there was a yield sign nearby. In the moments that followed, though, the man behind the wheel rolled down his window and called out to me in English. "Hello!" I'm usually suspicious, but the fact he was speaking to me in English made me believe that perhaps he was not from around here and was looking for some directions or something. I approached his window and began asking him what he wanted. He asked me in slightly shaky French if he could have my number. I kindly answered him that no, he could not. When he asked why, I told him I didn't really feel like giving it to some random guy on the street. I was a little pissed off because he was clearly trying to force me. I couldn't see at all inside his car because the back windows were tinted pitch black. The guy said to me, "Can I smoke a joint with you?" Again, I told him no and said goodbye to mark the end of the conversation. At that moment, he yelled out, "Well, I'm gonna fuck you," with a perverted smile. My blood began to boil. I was so angry. I yelled at him, "Who do you think you are? Get out of here, you loser!" The car moved a little further on the street, so its back door was now right in front of me. Suddenly, a man who had been hiding in the back opened it and grabbed my arm, trying to drag me in. Without thinking, I threw all my body weight against the door to close it. It worked. It slammed against his arm and he let go, and I began to run toward the bus shelter. You should know that during this whole scene, people were in the street, watching without doing anything to try and help me. The car followed me, and the man continued to catcall me and make lewd gestures. I screamed, telling him to get lost. I arrived at the stop, and a man with a daughter about 6 years old was sitting there. The father of the little girl asked me why I was screaming and told me that I scared his daughter. I explained to him what had happened and apologized to the little girl. The guy's car was still there at the red light not far from the stop, and from this red light he could turn around to get me whenever he wanted. I pointed him out to the father, but as their bus arrived, he got on with his daughter and simply wished me a good day. My bus would arrive in 10 minutes, but I couldn't just stay there. I was also thinking of all the high school students. It was the weekend and they'd all want to go home. I would not be the only one in danger. It was strange already that something like this was happening right at the exit of a high school. I ran over to the high school and called 2 of my colleagues and told them everything. I waited 20 minutes before leaving, escorted by one of my colleagues. I warned my friend and the parents before going to the park afterwards as planned, and then to a birthday party planned that same evening. It's been 2 weeks now, and I realize the incident affected me a lot more than I thought it would. I have nightmares about it. I have trouble going to my job even though I love it. I have anxiety attacks and the like, and I'm always looking at the cars when I leave work. I went to the police station as soon as possible to report it, but they told me my testimony was not enough for a complaint because I don't have the license plate. I left the station after they asked me what I was wearing during them trying to pull me into the car. The high school also reported the incident to the police, and I guess the story ends there. My name is Sarah. I'm 22, and I think I just experienced the worst urbex experience you can imagine. I'll do my best to describe the scene as much as possible. It was 3 years ago, and at that time I had a boyfriend who was almost 30. My thing was exploring, taking pictures, and learning about the history of places. I just found it so fascinating. On the other hand, my boyfriend at the time was not all that interested in that sort of thing. He had never done it either, though, but he saw me being so in awe of it that he wanted to come with me. I was super happy. Usually I did it all alone because my friends don't like it either. I know it's not really good to go alone, but I'm very stubborn. All happy, I started looking for a good spot. I won't say, of course, how I found it. Top secret information. I searched for an hour or so, checked, and found out a good spot. It was still current and apparently wasn't too well known yet. It was exciting, so much so that we decided to go there that same evening. We took the car hoping for good weather. No such luck, though. It started to rain. We didn't back down. We were determined to visit this place. 1 hour of driving later, we struggled a little to find the building, but finally we realized we had to continue on foot. It was hidden behind a small forest, and the path was too damaged for us to get there with the vehicle. We decided to park and turned on our torches, and walked a few minutes until we came across the building. It was actually a large hotel in rather good condition. We decided to go around the building first, and make sure no one besides ourselves was there, just to be a little bit safer. My boyfriend was not very calm at the time. I tried to reassure him as much as possible. After all, this was a first for him. Suddenly, he snapped his head toward one of the hotel windows and had a look of panic on his face. He said he was sure he'd just seen a small light coming from somewhere upstairs. I'll admit, I didn't really believe him at the time. I thought he was hallucinating because of his stress. Don't worry, there's no one in this kind of place. Come on, let's take a little tour and we'll leave. I promise. The poor guy, telling him that when all he wanted to do was to leave. We finally found a small entrance, and I got a strange feeling. You know, that feeling when you turn off your lights, and you feel like someone is right behind you. It felt like that, but constant, with every step in every room. We continued to wander, and we ended up hearing these noises, like when someone is pushing a wooden piece of furniture and it creaks and scrapes. The noise was coming from somewhere upstairs. At that point, I remembered the light my boyfriend thought he'd seen before we came in. At that moment, we both looked at each other, not really sure what to do. We had no choice but to call out, "Is anyone there?" No answer. Must have been an animal. Still more and more suspicious, we decided to go upstairs. We went up the stairs step by step, lamp in hand in total silence. We quickly noticed that all of the doors were closed, except for one, the one at the very end of the corridor, which was wide open. As we were about to move forward, we noticed a shape at the very end of the hall, but we couldn't make out what it was. The lights weren't strong enough. We were forced to move closer and closer until a human shape appeared from the darkness. There, we saw clearly with our own eyes a man standing a few meters away from us. He was glaring at us without saying a word and had the most chilling expression I've ever seen in my life. You know the look you give when you have a deep hatred for someone? It was the exact same as this man. My boyfriend pulled me back so we could start running, and I, like an idiot, froze in place. I was afraid to let the man out of my sight. Suddenly, we saw him take something out of his pocket, but we couldn't see what it was. We started running as fast as we could to the car. My boyfriend had lost his flashlight in the panic. We were getting hit by branches, but we didn't care. I kept turning around to see if he was following us, and I saw the light upstairs going in our direction. It was like a little laser. When we got to the car, we turned on the ignition and left immediately. The very next day, I discovered from the news that a body had been found in the trunk of a car abandoned right in front of the building where we were. I can tell you that my boyfriend never wanted to do urbex again after that. So to put this in context, this event takes place in Quebec in December during a snowstorm. It was after 5 p.m., so it was pitch black out. I was more or less 9 years old at the time and lived close to my primary school. Normally, my big sister and I would go to and from school together, but after an extracurricular activity that lasted longer than expected, I had to come home alone. In addition to the darkness, 20 centimeters of snow was forecast for that evening. Suffice to say, before leaving school, I had put on my snow pants, my hat, my gaiter, etc. to face the storm, making me much more late than I'd ever wanted to be. After 10 minutes of walking in the cold and almost zero visibility, I reached the corner of my street. Without warning, a man dressed in all black put his hand on my shoulder out of nowhere and asked me to help him clean his car and his backyard. I shyly answered that I couldn't do so because my parents were waiting for me. He replied that he would give me $100 if I helped him. I hesitated for a moment and unfortunately ended up accepting. He asked me to go toward the door which led to his courtyard, gesturing for me to go first. After walking through the door, I remember thinking to myself, where is this car? There was absolutely no car in sight anywhere. And that's when I heard him bar off his door and say, "Wouldn't you like to have a hot chocolate before we get started, big guy?" I was totally terrified. I understood now that I was in some real trouble. I told him that I absolutely had to go. That's when things took a dramatic turn. The man just ran up to me and hit me, saying, "Didn't your parents teach you good manners?" With a smile and soft voice, he added, "I'll do it for them." He took me by the arm and dragged me toward the door of his home. I did what any child would do in that situation. I screamed at the top of my lungs and began trying to bite him. I managed to break free from his grip. I knew that I had to escape, but how? He blocked off the gate to his courtyard. With my winter boots, my coat, and my snow pants, I didn't have great agility and massive speed. Add to that 10 centimeters of unshoveled snow, and I wasn't getting anywhere quickly. The man approached me, laughing as if taking pleasure in seeing me panic. He had a shovel gripped in his hands. He tried to swing and hit me in the legs, probably to prevent me from fleeing, but I barely managed to dodge. In a last act of hope, I climbed his fence to pass from his yard to the neighbor's yard. I got there, but when I fell on the other side, my snow pants tore open. I took to the adjacent alley and did the biggest sprint of my life until I reached the courtyard of my house. I banged on the back door with all my might until my sister opened it for me. As I closed the door behind me, I saw a figure holding something in their hand in the alleyway. Now in a state of total shock, I couldn't even respond when my sister asked what happened. She called my mother, who was preparing supper in the kitchen. I jumped at my mother and burst into tears. She immediately understood that something serious had happened and asked me to be honest. Completely distraught, all I could say was the man at the end of the street. My mother quickly went to wake up my father, who was taking his daily nap. My father asked me what happened as well. I only got out a few details, but it was enough to make him become mad with rage. He took his coat and a big kitchen knife and asked me to follow him and show him this house. Being far too traumatized to be able to speak about it though, I just told him it was the depraved house on the corner. After that, the police came and took my statement, but I didn't hear from the investigators or my parents about what happened, probably wanting to spare me from more trauma. The trauma was so great though that I finished the school year at home, and we moved after. 10 years later, my father finally told me the truth. When he arrived at the front of the house I'd pointed out, he found the front door was ajar. Inside the house, everything was dark and messy. The only sound was faint music coming out of a radio. My attacker had fled, but the police eventually caught and arrested him. Apparently, the man had already been incarcerated for assault, kidnapping of a child, and child pornography before, but had been released on parole for good behavior. He returned to prison immediately and saw his sentence vastly increased. It took me at least 2 hours to write this, because every time I remember it, his face and his awful laugh come to mind. Hello, my name is Rose. I'm 23 years old and I live in Nouvelle-Aquitaine. This story happened almost 10 years ago, and I admit that I still haven't really gotten over it. I lived in Paris until I was 11, and out of love, my mother moved to Nouvelle-Aquitaine to live with my stepfather and his 2 children. I knew my stepfather and his children very well. We were in the same age group, so we were always together. So much so that we usually forgot we weren't really blood-related brothers and sisters. When I was around 13 or 14 one summer, our parents went on a weekend trip. Things weren't going so well between them at the time. They really always taught us to be independent, so they thought we could handle it alone at home for that week. My stepfather's daughter was the oldest, so she started having little parties with her friends. Of course, she invited us as well. The day after one of these parties, after the guests had left, we started to tidy up the whole home. We were exhausted once everything was cleaned up and just sat down in front of the TV, grabbing something to eat together. You should know that our house was really worthy of a horror movie. We lived out in the middle of the forest and had only one way to get to our home. That is to say, it was a house in a dead end. Around our house, we had about 100 acres of forest. The closest home was 1 kilometer away. It's an old house that was originally a farm, so it's quite big. It was almost 200 years old as well, so everything creaked and cracked. The stairs, the floor upstairs, everything. But we were all used to it. That night, we were all smoking joints together. At one point, we said that we were going to go to bed after one last joint, each of us going to our room once we were finished. Only thing is, my father-in-law's son, the youngest of us all, had forgotten his phone downstairs, so he went back down to get it. About 5 minutes later, my phone began to ring. It was my little brother. I asked him why he was annoying me by calling when we were just upstairs, but he hung up immediately. We sent him a message to find out what was going on, and immediately after, he sent something back telling us not to talk. We did as he said, not really knowing why, but continued to whisper. About 2 minutes later, he asked us to discreetly look out the upstairs window to see if there was anyone on the terrace outside. At first, we thought he was making fun of us. We'd watched a horror movie that night. Maybe he just wanted to scare us a little. We sent him a message saying, "Haha, that's very funny." Except that only a minute later, there was a huge noise coming from outside. We saw two guys out on our terrace, one of them with a big knife. They started screaming, and one of them said something that made my blood run cold. "I swear that yesterday they were here. I could see the light from the forest. We could have had all three of them, and even more." Our little brother had hidden in the toilet area on the ground floor, which had no window when he went to get his phone. He stayed there all night and ended up falling asleep there. We all hid various places upstairs. The next day, when we got up, all our doors had traces of attempted break-ins. We called the police as well as our parents, who came back immediately. They obviously never found the men who did this, because we were in the middle of the countryside, so no cameras. After that, we installed surveillance cameras all around the home, and right at the entrance to the path to get there. Personally, I had nightmares about it for years, and had to sleep in bed with the eldest of us just to get to sleep. That sort of fixed things. Our parents ended up separating, though. I have to say that today, I'm happy to live in the city with surveillance cameras everywhere. August in 2020, I had moved in with my aunt and uncle to an insanely small rural town in California. When I first moved there, a friend of mine had made it a point to show me that someone could drive across the entire town within just 5 minutes. At the time, I didn't realize how important that fact would become to the safety of me and my loved ones. My best friend Haley and I, her being 17 and me being 18 at that time, were hanging out at a park about a 5 to 10 minute walk from where we lived. I say park because there were a few tables and benches, and technically it was a town park, but in reality it was more of a small grass clearing surrounded by woods with a dirt trail near the bank of a river. I had started to frequent this place after moving, walking down to the benches and trail to smoke or sit and watch the water. I had never really noticed any suspicious characters before this, even though I had been plenty warned about a couple creepers that were known in the area for bothering young girls. Haley and I had been smoking for a bit unbothered in the clearing when we decided to finish out our trip with exploring the trail a bit and just taking in the scenery. We had been walking and talking for about 5 minutes when I started to get this tension in my shoulders, that feeling you get when you know someone is looking right at you. I looked behind us, and now there was a man on the trail with us. Granted, this path was pressed right against the side wall of a gated community. Seeing people emerge to go on walks or jog was fairly common. I told my friend of the man's presence, but she wrote it off as me being anxious. She had a good point that I tended to be hyper-aware at times, but something about this man was giving me the wrong vibes. We kept walking. I would periodically look back and keep tabs on the dark-haired, middle-aged man walking 50 feet behind us. After not too long at all, the man started to pick up his pace. Calm, casual walking became more of a speed walk. I turned around completely and started walking backwards to try and communicate to this man that I was completely aware of his presence. He made toward the side of the trail immediately, looking like he was going to walk through the brush down to the river. I felt a bit stupid in that moment. I turned back around, now walking forward again. I looked back once more a bit further down to make sure he was gone. As I turned around behind us for the last time, though, I saw the man in a full sprint emerging back onto the trail and charging straight for me and Haley. I grabbed her sleeve with one hand and ripped out my pocket knife with the other. I can't remember what I said to her in that moment, but we started sprinting down the trail together. I had never gone very far down that path, and so I had no idea where it was going to be taking us. The man running after us was blocking our path back to the clearing and the road, though, and we could hear his footsteps on the dirt getting closer. I let go of Haley's sleeve so I could pull my phone out and called my uncle as we were running. I told him we were being chased down the trail at the park, but I couldn't exactly tell him where on the trail we were. I had never been much further than the entrance, and so I had no idea where it led to. My uncle told me to stay on the phone and be loud so he could find me. I let out the loudest, shrillest scream I could, and we kept running until we reached what was the clear end of the path. We ran up to an old metal fence surrounding trees and what looked like an old abandoned house or shed. We had also reached the back corner of the outer wall for the gated community. In that split second, this seemed like our best bet. I ripped us off the dirt path into some trees lining the cement wall and yelled at Haley to climb as fast as possible. I pushed her from the bottom so she could use a tree and the ledge to clear the top of the wall. I tossed my pocket knife and phone over. I'm not sure how I scaled the wall myself, but I scrambled up and over as fast as physically able. I landed right next to Haley, basically face first onto a neatly trimmed patch of grass inside the gated community, scaring a poor man who was right there walking his dog. I became innately aware of how strange we probably seemed. Two teenagers panicking and yelling while pointing a knife. The man seemed to know we were in some trouble, though. He came over to ask what was wrong and if we needed any help. Haley started explaining our situation while I got back on the phone with my uncle and told him we'd made it inside the gated community. Not even a minute later, my uncle came barreling toward the end of the path. We could hear him shouting at the man on the trail that he had a firearm and all the things he was going to do with it if the man didn't leave. The man with his dog led us to a little access gate a ways back on the wall and unlocked it so we could meet my uncle on the path. My uncle told us he drove his car through the park all the way to the trail entrance as fast as he could and started running for us, but he didn't see the man as he was going. He checked on us and I retold him what happened with more detail than I could have managed in my initial panic. He escorted us back down the trail to the car, firearm in full sight at the ready, in case the man on the trail decided to reveal himself. We didn't see him on our walk back, and I haven't returned to this place since then. Anytime I left the house before I eventually moved, though, I was constantly paranoid I was being followed. We were never able to figure out who the man was, and I haven't seen him since that day. This happened one summer when I went out to Kansas City. I was 19 years old at the time, and I had to leave my family's house. My parents were both really homophobic, and I never wanted to come out of the closet to them. Although some parents like that may come around eventually, I knew for a fact that mine would not be like those examples. I had a friend who had moved out of there right after high school, who was about a year above me. She was going to school out there, but her parents had rented her an apartment so she didn't have to live in the dorms. She had always been very accepting of me in high school and invited me to come and live out with her while I began to try and establish a life of my own out there. She didn't have internet at the time. It was in the late 1990s, so it wasn't easy for me to meet new people. She invited me onto campus a few times, but honestly, I just didn't feel right there. In order to help myself meet new people, I used to use the phone lines. It was something to do in between the time that I was trying to find myself a job. For people who are too young to remember phone dating lines, they were a far worse way to meet people than meeting online. It was way too easy for people to lie about who they were, because it was very much more difficult to trace when they did so. Because of this, I had quite a few bad experiences meeting people in that sort of way. There was one particular meeting, though, which put an ending to pretty much ever meeting anyone that way ever again. The person I met, Brett, was definitely older than he'd told me he was when he showed up, but that was okay. I knew people lied about their ages often, and it wasn't that huge of a deal for me. Plus, I hate to sound like this, but I was broke at the time and he offered to buy me dinner. It sure beat just staying at the house and being bored, so I decided to give it a shot and go out to dinner with him. Now, one thing I try to never do is lead people on. A lot of the times, these phone dates make me feel really awkward. People generally expect sex or something immediately afterward. This time though, after the dinner, rather than ask me back to his place and me having to turn him down, Brett asked if I wanted to go for a drive with him. I was totally up for that at least, and it felt like the pressure was slightly off to be expected to do anything. We drove around the town and he pointed out quite a lot of the landmarks to me. I was actually happy for it, but I kept being surprised that he never offered to take me back to his place. He had already known I was staying with a friend, so I never made an offer back to him either. This happened about 25 years ago, I think, so I can't quite remember the name of the structure we were on, but there was this bridge over a highway that was closed off for construction. He drove us out there. It was pretty late at night at the time, and it was the weekend as well, so there were not really any people around this area. He parked his car and then asked me to walk out on the bridge with him. It was kind of a weird atmosphere, and I honestly felt awkward about it, but I decided to go ahead and do so. I have to admit though, it was pretty neat. It was pretty dark up on the bridge, and it was so high up as well. It was really cool watching the cars drive up and under the bridge. I can't quite explain it, but it was a really neat feeling. I was already apprehensive about heights to begin with, when I suddenly felt Brett grab me from behind. He lifted me fully off the ground, as if he were trying to toss me over the railing on the bridge. Fortunately for me though, I had very quick reflexes and was in good shape as well. I just barely managed to grab onto the railing and stop him from throwing me over. There was a struggle at first. This guy was seriously trying to throw me off the bridge onto the road below. I actually thought for a moment there was a chance he was going to get me over it too, but I had a good grip on the railing and I was able to find some leverage. Looking under my arm, I found where his knee was. I took my foot and jammed it back into his knee. He yelled but still didn't let me go. I had to kick him again and again before he finally released me. I was able to get myself back onto my feet and on the ground. Brett had almost fallen over, but it seemed he wasn't looking to attack me again quite yet. Instead, he quickly limped over to his car, jumped in, and sped backward really fast. He did all of this before I even had a chance to react. It was obvious to me that I'd hurt him quite badly. I had no intention of going after him though. I didn't have a cell phone or any money on me, so I had to find my way back to my friend's apartment on my own. It took me quite a while to do so, and I had quite a story to tell her when I got home. I didn't spend a lot of time in Kansas City, and I never came across Brett again either, which was a huge relief. I'm a 32-year-old woman who was hired to be a manager at the gym I now work at. It's a pretty boring job, to be totally honest with you. I was hired more for my managerial and office skills than gym knowledge, which is basically zero. I had never gone to the gym a day in my life. It's not exactly my thing. Genetically, I'm skinny as a twig, so I never really even thought about it until I got my job. During the time this happened, I had already started considering quitting. I had already worked there for a few years, and it made me feel like my life was draining away every second I was on the job. Plus, I didn't enjoy that every time a physical fight would happen, which was quite often, people would come to me for help. Yeah, like my 5', 90-pound self is gonna do anything about two men pushing 300 pounds fighting each other. What am I supposed to do exactly? Get in between them and ask them politely to stop? That would probably end in my death. Occasionally, if I was lucky, it would be some teenage girls fighting instead, and all I had to do was threaten to call the police and they'd get scared of getting in trouble with their parents. so they'd stop with the hair pulling and slapping almost immediately. This night, however, I was absolutely not prepared for what was about to happen in a few moments. The day started quite boring as usual. I did all my office work and no one really bothered me. Every so often, I'd do some rounds about the gym just to observe how my employees interacted with everyone and make notes on things I thought could be improved. The gym I worked at was open at some weird hours. 24 hours a day, Monday through Friday. Saturday, we were open from 5 a.m. to 10. It was a Saturday night at around 9:30 when things started to get a bit weird. I was sitting there in my office doing some paperwork and watching the cameras when I saw a woman walk in. I did think it was a little bit strange considering we were closing in only 30 minutes. But occasionally you'd get people wanting to get in a short workout after they got off work or something, so I figured I'd just let her do her thing. If she wasn't done by about 10:10 or so, I'd politely ask her to leave for the night. We still had quite a few people in the gym who were regulars anyway, that got every second of workout time they could, so the gym was about half full or so. I continued watching the woman on the security cameras because I was quite suspicious of her at first. I also noted that she came in wearing what looked like some white scrubs, like she'd just gotten off a nursing job or something. She had no bags with her to change clothes and just went straight to working out in this outfit. Only she did everything in this really strange way. Like using the leg press with only one leg and no weights attached to it. Every time she would do a rep, she would laugh, and not like a regular laugh or a giggle either. She would loudly cackle and look around, then begin talking as if someone was standing next to her, except of course there was nobody there. She did the same thing on multiple machines. I ended up having one of my employees rush into my office and tell me it was a safety issue. I needed to go out there and tell her to use the machines correctly or she could really hurt herself. At first, I told my employee to tell her herself, but she said that she already had, and the woman had just glared at her, then looked directly behind her and started speaking to someone who wasn't there. Needless to say, it freaked out my employee quite a bit, and the woman continued using the equipment in an unsafe manner. She figured she'd have to come to me to tell her. I really didn't want to have to deal with this, but it was part of my job that I had to do continuously every day. So I got on my way. I walked out of my office toward the woman and immediately noticed she had begun sweating quite profusely. She was holding a dumbbell that could barely stay in her hand without slipping out from the moisture pooling in her palm. I could see the sweat from even 20 feet away. At this point, I was really worried something was wrong with her. She was going to hurt herself by dropping this on her foot and breaking a bone or something. I went up to her, and the smell emanating off of her was disgusting. I mean, totally putrid. It smelled almost like she'd soiled herself and started rotting, and wasn't even noticing. I had to do everything I could to keep myself from gagging, as to not offend this poor woman. Ma'am, I'm gonna have to ask you politely to use the equipment properly. There are guides placed on all the machines and walls around the gym displaying the correct way to use them. We don't want you to get hurt. The only response I got from her was this strange growling sound, as if she were growling at me like a dog. I found this super weird, obviously. She wouldn't look at me, and instead of agreeing, she just continued using the dumbbell like she had been before. She was kind of throwing it from one hand to the other while jumping around randomly. It was a lightweight dumbbell, so it wasn't too scary, but at the same time, obviously we can't allow her to continue doing that. There was something really strange going on here. Around this time, I tried telling her to put the weight down and just leave. She ignored me, but this time raised her hand in the air, as though she were going to strike me with it. Now panicked, I did the only thing I could think to do. I reached forward and pulled the weight out of her sweaty hand. And that's when things got really crazy. After I snatched it away from her, a sort of frenzied behavior began. She started screaming like a monkey, then went up and picked the lighter dumbbells and started throwing them randomly across the gym. Mirrors along the wall shattered as they were struck by the weights. She even began throwing them at other people, and unfortunately she managed to hit a middle-aged woman right in the leg, which made her fall to the ground. Weights were being thrown in every direction. The only way I was going to be able to keep as many people safe as I could was by forcing everyone out of the gym and calling the police. Once everyone was out, I went back in to try and de-escalate the situation. The older woman who had been struck with the weight was still on the ground grabbing her leg in pain, unable to get outside by herself, so it seemed she was unable to walk. I had to make sure nothing was going to happen to her. Someone had to go in and protect her from this mentally ill woman throwing things that could kill somebody. Before I went back in, though, I instructed my employee to call the police. They arrived about 20 minutes later and entered the building cautiously. While I was trying to talk the woman down, she started talking again to people who were not there. She kept looking around the gym as she said in a panicked voice, "Please, I don't want to kill them. Don't make me. They won't hurt me. They're the good guys." "You're lying. They won't take me back there." She looked at the officers and screamed, "You can't take me back. I won't let you." That's when she went back to tossing dumbbells at the police, and through all the fear and confusion, I gotta say I was a little bit impressed by her strength. She began running out of the lightweight dumbbells, and she was throwing the heavier ones just as hard. The police pulled out their tasers and warned her that if she didn't stop right now, they'd have to hurt her. I don't really think she knew what they were talking about though, since she wasn't really in her right mind. She kept on tossing them, and before I knew it, she was on the ground convulsing in shock. They put her in handcuffs, but as they were taking her away, she just kept screaming she was sorry over and over. It seemed like she was really scared too. By the time they let her out of the gym, a large group of onlookers had formed outside, and somehow the news got a hold of what was happening as well. They had somehow showed up too. For the next few days, they ran the story as a crazy woman taking massages at the local gym, but that wasn't the case at all. This false narrative actually made me quite mad once I was given the full details of what happened. I gave the police the security footage of everything that happened that night, and they took my statement as well. Thankfully, no one was permanently injured. The woman who was hit in the leg ended up with a pretty nasty bruise and was released from the hospital later. The gym closed for a few days for repairs to fix everything that was damaged by her throwing. I found out the woman was suffering from severe schizophrenia and had actually escaped from the local hospital and somehow made her way into our gym. That kind of explains why she was talking to people who weren't there, because in her mind, they were. Learning about what she was going through actually made me feel really bad for her. She didn't know what she was doing, and she didn't want to hurt anyone. She was just scared, and it made me sad to know she was so afraid of going back to that hospital. After that whole incident, I worked at the gym for another year before quitting. Right now, I'm actually going to school to be a nurse, so I may be able to help people like her in the future. Hello. I wish to tell you where my fear of going into the water comes from. It's not something I'm ashamed of exactly, but I've never told the real details to anyone. To begin with, I didn't have a fear of water when I was younger. I was quite a good swimmer actually, with a lot of imagination. I loved The Little Mermaid, but after meeting someone when I was 13 years old, everything changed suddenly. Now, a little introduction to my childhood to understand the context. My mom couldn't have a baby because of an illness she had, so she and her husband adopted me when I was just a baby. I never had any difficulties regarding that though, and I had a very happy childhood being an only child. They're my mother and my father, that's all. However, one day, they got divorced. My dad had an affair with a younger woman. She got pregnant, and he told my mom when the pregnancy was almost done. I was 9, and it broke the relationship I had with my dad and gave me many insecurities about being unloved by him. My parents stayed friends only for me, and for many years I spent half of the summer holidays with one and the other half with the other. This summer I was with my dad, his new wife, and my little half-brother, and I really hated it. Being a teenager who despised this new side of my family and being forced to go with them to a beach, I was very grumpy and very dramatic. It was a nudist beach as well, a new thing my father had seemingly discovered with his new partner, but I didn't really care since I was allowed to wear a swimsuit if I wanted. One day, my dad came back to us with a guy around 50 years old. He introduced himself as an English teacher. We'll call him Alex. Usually I had nice grades, but I wasn't very good at English since it wasn't my first language. My dad told me Alex had agreed to teach me a bit and help me to do my summer homework. I was quite happy actually, seeing there was an opportunity not to have my father helping me do it instead. The next day, Alex came back to us and helped me do a few exercises while my dad went off swimming. After an hour or so, Alex proposed we go into the water, and I accepted. I said to my father's new wife where I was going, and followed Alex. He gave me a mask with which to watch the fishes. Now, I know that's stupid. I was well aware of stranger danger, but I was happy to have a distraction, and didn't think this guy could possibly be dangerous. After all, my own father had vouched for him. There weren't a lot of waves, and the sea was quite clear, so I remember watching in fascination all of the colorful fishes swimming around me. I followed Alex without difficulty, and we turned around this big cropping of rocks. There, he gave me the sign to go up and told me we could rest there. Like I said at the beginning, I was a good swimmer, so I put my mask away from my mouth and said I was not tired at all. I don't know if he didn't hear me or if he didn't care, because in the very next moment, I felt his hands wrap around my hips and force me onto his naked lap. I panicked, and he shoved my head under the water while trying to pin my back against his front. I couldn't breathe, and my feet couldn't touch the sand at the bottom. I couldn't get to the surface either. I thought the man was about to drown me. I was so scared I don't even remember if he tried to touch me or anything. I kicked and struggled wildly until finally he let go of me. I climbed onto the rocks and rushed onto the shore before running back to the beach on foot. The rest of the day I was completely silent, but nobody seemed to notice, except during the evening when my mom called me on the phone and immediately knew something was wrong. I briefly explained to her what had happened, and she told everything to my father, who confronted Alex the next day. He never contacted the police though. I never met Alex again. Maybe he wasn't really an English teacher to begin with and was simply looking for an excuse to meet a naive teenager. The moment Alex grabbed me was so quick as well, maybe only 20 seconds, but it left a huge scar inside me. I can't go totally underwater without being able to touch the bottom without panicking. I can't swim anymore. I can't look at pictures taken underwater, and I'm very wary of older men. I know it could have ended way worse, and I'm glad that's the only thing that happened. I lived in a small suburbanish area of a small town. My house was very close to my grandparents' house. It was my house on one block, a large church with a large parking lot was the entirety of the next block, and then the block of my grandparents' house right after. My grandparents were both retired, and so every day during the summer, while our parents were at work, a few of my cousins and I would go over to spend the day at my grandparents' house. Honestly, it was a really fun childhood to have. When I was around 11 or so, my parents bought us a dog. One of my chores during the summer was to walk over to my house and let the dog out to use the bathroom, then walk back over to my grandparents. One of my cousins, who's a year older than me, would always volunteer to go with me. Well, one day, while we were on our way back to my grandparents' house after doing the chores, a random guy drove up right next to us. In one quick motion, he opened his car door and yelled, "Gotcha!" My cousin and I took off running immediately. He slammed his door shut and sped ahead of us to try and intercept us. He pulled into the parking lot of the church, anticipating us trying to run through it, but instead of running through the parking lot, my cousin and I sprinted behind the church and continued in the direction of my grandparents' house. When we emerged from the back side, the man was still in the parking lot watching. He had his head on a swivel for us. We continued to run. A few heartbeats later, he spotted us once again. We heard his tires squeal against the asphalt as he began to chase us. Thankfully, we were very close to my grandparents' house and quickly made it inside. We ran in and told my grandmother, who of course didn't believe us and told us to go back outside and play. And so, my cousin and I were forced back outside. Still spooked though, neither of us felt like playing and just sat down on the front porch wary. Soon, the man drove back around and slowed down as he passed us by. We ran back in and told my grandmother, who again didn't believe us and again told us to go back outside. Well, the third time of us running in and interrupting her soap opera, she finally came out on the porch to check. At the same time, the guy was driving by again. She called the police after, and while we were talking with the officer, the guy drove by once more. We pointed him out, but the police officer only took our statements and left. We never saw the guy again after. I would like to think the officer pulled him over and scared him into not bothering us or anyone else again, but I highly doubt he actually did anything. What is up guys, Blue Spooky here. Thank you guys so much for watching, especially if you made it this far to the end of the video. If you liked the video, please be sure to like, share, comment, and subscribe if you feel so inclined. If you have any feedback for me as well, be sure to leave that in comments below the video. If you guys have a story you'd like to send in, or if you'd like to contact me for any reasons, there will be links to my social media in the description below the video, including my Facebook, Gmail, and Twitter accounts. Go ahead and send me a message on any of those, and I'll try to get to you as soon as possible. If you do decide to send in a story, please be sure to include in the tagline what the name of the story is if it has one, what type of story it is if it has one, and how you'd like to be credited in the description below the video. Please make sure to include as much detail as you feel comfortable with and try to use as much proper grammar as possible to make sure you have the highest chance of appearing in a future video. Overall, I think that's pretty much it for now guys, so thank you so much for watching, and I hope you guys have a great day.